Understanding Dementia Behaviors.
Yeah. Vlogging pod starts like a conversation. Cup of coffee with no destination. Just voices trying to understand what's happening across this land. From your stories told to the pages turned. Every question, every word, supported by SheSharesStudios.net.
Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. Today, we're continuing our Dementia Awareness series with Dementia educator and advocate Kathi Miracle. Kathi, now, for those who may be joining us for the very first time, could you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your passion for helping individuals and families navigate the dementia journey?
Well, thank you for having me again. I love being on your show. Happy to introduce myself. I am a native of Colorado. My office is out of Denver, Colorado. I have worked in senior living, focusing on dementia almost my entire career. I usually say there's not much I haven't seen, although then something else new pops up and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess there is. And so it's always an interesting and challenging journey for professionals. So I know it's an interesting and challenging journey for families. I will tell people you either love working in dementia care or you hate it. And the only in between are the families who have to travel that journey because they simply have no choice. So I founded Silver Tsunami a couple of years ago to really better educate families to travel this journey easier with better knowledge and with great resources.
Awesome. I picked the wrong moment to suck down some water. No, you're fine. I paused my mic and thought, this is an opportunity to drink some water. Little did I know.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. What I was going to say before I was spitting that water right back out was one of the most difficult parts of caring for someone living with dementia is understanding changes in their behavior. What may seem confusing or even frustrating to family members is often the result of changes taking place within their brain. Today, I'd like to take a time to spend some time talking about those behaviors and why they happen, how families can better understand and possibly respond to them.
So this is probably one of the topics I get asked to speak on the most, whether I'm at conferences or training professionals or talking to families. So the very first thing I talk about is that, define the word behavior. So when we actually define the word behavior, what that means is that that's how somebody acts or conducts oneself, especially toward others. It is the way, an animal or a person acts in a response to a particular situation or a stimulus. And it's also the way in which a natural phenomenon or machine works or functions. Somehow, the word behavior has been negatively linked to people with dementia, toddlers, and sometimes educated individuals. And so, I always, when I do training, I like to really refer to it more as an emotional expression. But through this, because I know we're using the word behavior, I'll refer to it as behavior. But really, what I tell people too is 80% of the behaviors people see is actually triggered, is actually because of the person interacting or their environment. Only 20% of behaviors actually come from a dementia diagnosis. And so if we learn to change how we are approaching someone or change the environment, we actually can minimize behaviors significantly. When I was in senior living and I ran memory care buildings, you could walk through my building just about at any time of day, especially I loved when tours would come in at sundowning hours because you wouldn't see my residents having behaviors because my staff was trained on what to do. So when we look at that 80% of, what triggers a behavior, those four things are communication, approach, medical need, and environment. So the easy one to start with is an environment. I've had people say, oh, George is having, he's really agitated. And I would go down and the TV's going, the radio's going, a family's having a lot of people. And I'm like, whoa, look at the environment George is in. How about we redirect George into a calmer environment? So and it's also why I never can understand why someone will do a cognitive assessment on an individual in an emergency room. I'm like, oh, overstimulated stress.
Mm.
So much going on. They're in pain. They're in crisis. That's when you're going to choose to do a cognitive assessment. Okay. I don't think the score is valid, but all right. So environments really do matter. Even somebody, so as I actually had somebody say that if somebody's in a very quiet environment, like there's no stimulation at all, like you go completely to the other end of the spectrum, can that cause a problem? And so one of my colleagues and I decided to sort of test it out. And there was a day we decided, okay, for 8 hours, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to sit on the couch. And for busy
Mm.
people, they're like, oh my God, I would take that day. And that's what I was like, I'll take that day. But we said, you can't play on your phone. You can't watch TV. You can't listen to the radio. You can't read a book. You're just sitting there. And for the first, I don't know, hour and a half, it was kind of pleasant. I just watched a squirrel play outside. But then all of a sudden, I was like starting to count the dots in the ceiling. I was starting to trying to entertain myself. And by the end of the 8 hours when my family came home, my husband was like, you were a bit testy and cranky. You really were. So for individuals who, they live alone and a family member shows up to bring them food or help clean their house or something, and they get snapped at them, it could possibly be that they're in an understimulating environment. So you want to try to find that balance between an overstimulating environment and an understimulated environment so that you can keep the person balanced. Another thing is a medical need. I've seen people who are in pain, and because of that pain, they become very agitated. And I had a daughter one time. She's like, "Oh, my mom's not in pain." I said, "Oh, I think she is." And she's like, "No." And I said, "Well, so families will say they'll ask these yes or no questions. And the most common word we hear from the time we're born till the time we die is the word no. So we're conditioned, to like, I'm a car dealership. I walk up to you, you're looking for a car. Before I open my mouth, you're ready to say, no, I'm just looking. I haven't even said anything, right? And so we're conditioned as individuals to say no. And so when we start saying, are you in pain? No. Are you hungry? No. Are you thirsty? No. And we're asking these yes and no questions. And when it comes to medical need, that's really, really, really dangerous. And somebody may be taking an over-counter medication, and what they need is a scheduled one. Or they're on a 200 milligram scheduled pain med, but what they really need is a 400 one. Or an infection arises. And people get
Mm.
agitated very quickly with like a urinary tract infection, or, when COVID existed, or pneumonia. They get very agitated very quickly and they get very confused. So medical needs can actually trigger behaviors. How somebody approaches a person with dementia. I tell people, don't ever approach somebody from behind, because their line of vision is really about 45 degrees to the right of them and 45 degrees to the left. And if you're approaching from behind, they don't know you're approaching, and they don't know, and you tap them on the shoulder, they could turn around and pop you one because they didn't know.
Mm.
I'll tell people, put your hands in fists and put it up by your eyes. And I'll walk directly in front of the person and I'll say, tell me when you can see me. And I'm like in their personal space, almost nose to nose before they can see me. And what that really sort of represents is glaucoma or cataracts. That person's vision is starting to diminish, and they're not going to see somebody approach from the front. And people, a lot of times, especially professionals, they walk so fast that they approach the person too fast, and the person's brain does not have the time to process what's happening. So they become startled. And
Mm.
approaching them slowly from a 45-degree angle with your hand outstretched. Because for somebody like you or I, when someone you don't know gets in your personal space, we usually back up. If they do it again, we sort of back up. If they do it again, you kind of put your hand out, kind of like, I need you to stay with this.
Yeah.
Not comfortable, right? And so our personal space is 3 feet. For the person with dementia, their personal space is 6 feet. It's their 3 feet and your 3 feet. And if you get into their personal space, they don't back up, they just start defending it. And that's where I see a lot of resident to resident altercations that happen in professional communities, is because, the little lady is trying to fix the handkerchief in the man's shirt pocket and gets too close and he hits her or he pushes her because he's defending his space. And so then it becomes really problematic. So approach doing it slowly. I always keep my hand outstretched. And when I'm saying, hi, I'm Kathi, and the person usually will outstretch their hand, and I can pump their hand a couple of times, which gets their attention, because the palm of your hand is the second most sensitive part of your body. And then they're looking at me, and then I have their attention to get closer to them, or I have their permission to get closer, because they'll smile, or you'll see a look on their face, or you see this look of confusion on their face, and you know not to keep getting closer. You're gonna get hit, or something could happen. And so you want to keep your distance if you don't see the right look on their face. And then communication is the other piece. I see people who communicate too much and too fast. And when that happens, the person doesn't have the ability to process everything that was just thrown at them. So the simpler, the better. Don't give somebody a lot of choices. 2 choices is great. But I tell people, you want to slow down your speech. You're going to feel like you're walking through mud when you talk, but you
Mhm.
want to slow it down so they can understand you. I also say, as men age, this is where God has a sense of humor. And men age, the decibel range they lose their hearing is the same decibel range as women's voices. So for female caregivers, you want to lower your voice and talk a little slower. It feels funny in the beginning, but when you get practice at it, the person can hear that. They can't. I tell people all the time, quit screaming and yelling. They can't hear that. They just can't. Just lower your voice and talk a little slower. And when people do those 4 things correctly, they can minimize behavior significantly while they're caring for the person with dementia.
Hmm. That's very interesting. Now, you talked about the feet, which I would take that as like one of the triggers because you're invading personal space. So, what are some of the most common triggers that can lead to agitation, anxiety, anger, or possibly confusion in dementia patients?
I think if I were to pick 2, I would say approach and communication. Those are the 2 top ones I see constantly happening because people they approach the person too fast. They approach the person from the wrong direction. I've even seen people they're trying to help somebody get their shoes and socks and their undergarments and their pants on, and they've positioned themselves directly in front of the person with dementia. And if you startle them, like sometimes when you're trying to put somebody's socks on, their toes can get stuck. And if that hurts, because the person's trying to do it in a quick manner, if that hurts, they're going to defend themselves. And the first thing they do is they reach out and smack the person or push the person or pull their hair. And you've positioned yourself directly in front of them to be kicked in the wrong place or you're an open target. So I always say, keep yourself to the side, always a 45-degree angle, because they have a harder time. They're not going to kick to the side. That's not natural. They're just going to kick directly in front of them. So the approach is really, really important. I actually watched a lady who was delivering medications to a woman with dementia, and she wasn't carrying the medications correctly. She just had this cup in the palm of her hand. And when she approached from behind, the woman turned around and hit her, and pills went flying everywhere. And I thought,
Mm.
oh my. But she started. It's kind of like if you
Yeah.
came home and someone came out from behind a door and went, boo. Your first
Ugh.
reaction is to kind of, and your second reaction usually is to take a swing at somebody, right? Like,
Mhm.
don't do that. Well, that's what you're doing with the person with dementia is you're startling them. So their natural human instinct is to they get startled and then they're going to react. And so approach is a big one that I tell people be very, very careful. Approach from the front, approach 45 degrees, approach very slowly, keep your hand outstretched. Do not approach from behind. Be careful if you're coming up from behind. You actually want to go around them and until they can see you, and then you can kind of say their name. But if you say their name from behind, it's going to cause some challenges. Communication is the other one. I see people all the time. Hey, George, how are you doing? Okay, all he heard was, hey, George. He never heard anything else. And then the caregiver gets frustrated because George isn't responding and they're talking faster or they're talking meaner. And the person with dementia will pick up on body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice before they pick up on anything else. And so it starts to create panic and they start to get agitated. And now it's just this tug of war going back and forth.
Mm. Now, we often hear about behaviors such as wandering, repetitive questions, suspicion, or even accusations toward family members. So what do you believe causes these behaviors, and how should possibly the caregivers respond when they happen to occur?
So let's take wandering first of all, because I have people who talk to me about, George wandered away from the house. And so there's a difference between purposeful wandering, non-purposeful wandering, and exit seeking. So purposeful wandering happens usually in the home and the person's going around and touching things that they're familiar with. And that's actually a self-soothing activity. And you don't want to mess with that. There's also then you have the non-purposeful wandering. It does happen more in communities than in homes. But you see this jig-jaggedy sort of behavior. They're pacing, their breathing gets different, their face gets red. That's something that they're getting agitated and you need to jump
Mm.
on and be able to redirect. Exit seeking means they're actually trying to get out. They're trying to get out a window. They're trying to get out a door. They're pounding on something. there's a reason what they're trying to get away from, and so I always, what I used to tell my staff is, I'm like, if Betty is trying, where do you think she's going to go? She's 80 with a walker. Like, do you not think you can outwalk her or outrun her? So if she's trying to get out this door, what is she trying to get to the other side to see? So I used to take residents all the time, and I'd walk them outside. I'm like, well, what are we looking for? We're looking for your car. Well, what color is your car? Blue. Okay. Well, I don't see a blue car here. So maybe we should go back in and make some phone calls. Okay. Well, by the time they get back inside, they don't know where I'm going to make some phone calls. People try so hard as soon as you say no to the person with dementia, you've now created an argument, and good luck winning it. And so it's kind of like, what is happening? The challenge becomes when people are, you took my money, you took my wallet, because they take it and they hide it so that anytime they find it, well, now it's not on top of the dresser where it's been 50 years of my life. So the explanation is you must have taken it. So I try really hard at the end of the day, like if someone is you're helping them get ready for bed, can you help them put that in the right spot? Does that work 100% of the time? No, nothing works 100% of the time when it comes to the dementia journey. And so the more consistent routines we can create for people, the better. There's people who will say, you're not my husband, because as we age, they no longer maybe understand the person in front of them is a spouse they've been married to for 50 or 60 years, because what they remember in their head is when I was younger. When I was younger, and that's certainly not the person. Or I've seen people who believe that their oldest son is their husband or their brother because they look so much like that individual because of genetics. And those are really tough things to kind of work their way around. Most often in times, families become, it's disturbing for a family. It's distraught, and they focus on their feelings and their emotions. And not that those aren't important, they absolutely are. But in that moment, you have to find a way to redirect the person with dementia first. And unfortunately, as a caregiver, we have to put how we're feeling and how we react in the situation on the back burner, because the person with dementia has brain damage. You can't negotiate with them. You cannot try to convince them of otherwise. And when you try to do those things, you're just going to enter into an argument. And again, you won't win. So in those moments, I really try to find someone to talk about the topic, or to talk about something that, you're not creating this argument. You're not creating this tug of war. And so like if someone's saying, I can't find my wallet, instead of saying, well, you must have hidden it. Well, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. It's, oh, well, tell me about the wallet. What color is it? Okay. How big is it? And what do you believe is inside of it? You're talking about the topic. Okay. And where do you think you put it right here on the dresser and it's not here? I have no idea what could have happened, but I will help you look for it. So we can talk about the topic. And what I will tell listeners is I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I certainly didn't sound like this 25 years ago or 28 years ago. This takes a lot of practice to be able to not react, because we're human. The very first thing we want to do is we want to defend ourselves, and we react. And so it takes a lot of practice to just take a step back and take a big, deep breath and to say, okay, what questions can I think of that's talking about the topic with this individual, to start to try to redirect them to either get their mind off of what's going on right now, or to be able to find a solution to what they're upset or agitated about.
Right. I can understand that. Sorry. I'm looking at my camera. My husband's home. Let's see. So when we talk about dementia and becoming upset or emotionally upset, what are some of the techniques, again, that caregivers might be able to use to handle the situations?
Well, usually what my staff was trained to do is I bought a lot of unscented lotion in my communities. Lavender, using an essential oil that has lavender in it. There's a lot of great oils out there, different companies. Just make sure you're buying 100% oil. If you go into a store, you see oils that are all the same price that are not 100%. I mean, like rose oil should be more expensive than lavender oil. Lavender oil was one of the cheapest oils you can get. But lavender oil, and I would put it in unscented lotion, because I would sit down with somebody, and if they're agitated about something, I go, well, can we sit and talk? Sometimes they'll let you, sometimes they won't. But with people, if I say, oh, oh my goodness, we have some ice cream right here. Can we just sit and talk? And then I can take lavender lotion and I'm rubbing the palm of their hands. I've been able to de-escalate people very quickly, because again, the palm of the hand is the second most sensitive part of the body. The first is anything around the mouth. But if you're sitting there kind of massaging the palm of their hand with lavender oil or lavender lotion, and I really truly get unscented lotion with essential oil. I don't go out and get lavender lotion that you don't have the amount of lotion, lavender scent in it that you need. So
Mhm.
that's I use those two combinations. But just sitting there and just massaging the palm of their hand with the lavender that they're inhaling, that actually can keep somebody, it starts to calm them down. That's one thing. The other thing that it can be really, really helpful for people is that from the time somebody's born until the time we die, when we feel any kind of emotion, when we're angry, frustrated, agitated, overwhelmed, depressed, the brain actually releases a chemical. And what that chemical craves is something salty, sweet, or fatty. So I've been in trainings and conferences, and I can pick out several people and say, tell me what your comfort food is. And it will land in one of those three categories. So as when we get frustrated or we get agitated, we turn to chips and fries and pizza and beer and wine and chocolate and ice cream. And it will fit into one of those three categories. And once the body is consuming one of those things that's salty, fatty, or sweet, all of a sudden that chemical starts to calm down in the brain and the person can start to calm down too. So I used to go through a lot of vanilla ice cream too, because we get vanilla ice cream and put caramel on it or strawberry topping or chocolate syrup. So that, as soon as somebody sees that, and that was really important to me as part of their admission paperwork is what is their three top comfort foods. And most people know that. And so I would make sure that we knew what the three top comfort foods were. And we would be able to give it to that person and that's something I like. And as soon as they start consuming it kind of on their own, they start to calm down. And then if you can combine that with the lavender lotion, there's ways to be able to, soft music if they have a favorite, blanket or stuffed animal. I mean, everybody's just slightly different in what's going to calm them down. What I will say is don't say, please calm down, that nobody in the history of the world, when hearing those words, actually calm down. So don't say those words. So we want to use the techniques that are individualized or customized to that person.
Right. So, Kathi, as we finish our conversation for today, what would you think would be the most, like our listeners to remember about the behavioral changes that often accompany dementia?
Well, the very first thing that my teams and when I work with families that I really impress upon them is that you are interacting with an individual who has brain damage. There's nothing other way to describe this because as the brain goes through the dementia journey, whatever type of dementia that is, the brain is shrinking and the brain is having more difficulty sending messages from point A to point B or difficulty processing the information or recalling it. So how would you interact with a person is 6 months out of a car accident? You're not going to expect them to interact with you as normally as you would before they had the car accident because we have this somewhat understanding that we know car accident created this traumatic brain injury for you. And somehow people don't seem to get that a traumatic brain injury is brain damage, just like dementia is brain damage. So you have to enter into their world. You have to approach and interact with the person with patience, creativity, being a detective, providing space, and most of all, having a sense of humor. I used to tell my teams all the time, check your ego and pride at the door, because if you don't, it's going to get bruised and damaged pretty quickly. And so you have to always look at things from their perspective. And there are many times we say, I know this is not the person. I know it's the brain damage. And so I need to give them some grace and I need to take a step back. And it's okay to say, I need a break. I need to walk away from this. I mean, families who do with this 24 hours, 24/7, I don't know how they do it because in a community, we have different shifts. We tap out. And when somebody's getting frustrated, somebody else steps in to then deal with, whatever's going on. But
Right.
families, they need to realize and understand it's okay to step away from the situation, take a break. Hence the reason I really encourage getting a support system in place early on, even if it's meaning that somebody's coming in to give that caregiver the respite they need, because at some point they're going to burn out. They will say and do something that is going to not something they can ever take back. So I tell families all the time, please know and understand any type of dementia is brain damage and that you're dealing with a person who the brain is not functioning the way it did prior to having that diagnosis.
Right. I want to thank you again, Kathi, for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
Awesome. I want to thank our listeners for joining us. Until next time, bye bye for now.